Do you believe a simple interaction can change someone's destiny? Johnny Depp was about to find out that it can, in an encounter that began as an unexpected scene on the streets of Paris and transformed into an emotional story of courage and compassion. It all started when a desperate young girl clung to his leg, seeking help. But what seemed like a mere plea for assistance revealed something much deeper, a secret that not only challenged her life, but also his. Get ready for a story filled with twists, humanity, and an unforgettable lesson on how small gestures can create extraordinary change. On an overcast morning like any other, the grand facade of a luxury hotel in Paris gained a special glow. Johnny Depp, with his unmistakable style and a discreet smile that concealed layers of stories, bid farewell to fans and photographers. He carried the air of someone who had seen it all but could still be surprised. The star had barely taken a few steps when an unexpected event stole the scene. A young girl, with a shaved head and a desperate look, darted through the crowd like lightning. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, she clung to his leg with all her strength, like someone finding a safe harbor in the middle of a storm. Surprise washed over Johnny's face, but he didn't have time to react. A nearby merchant, visibly irritated, shouted at the girl to back off. Frightened, she released his leg and disappeared within seconds, like a shadow blending into the crowd. The moment was brief, but it left a profound mark. The scene, filled with tension and mystery, brought a heavy silence to the surroundings. Johnny stood still for a moment, watching the direction she had fled, while flashes and murmurs filled the air. There was something about that girl that wasn't easy to forget. Perhaps it was the contrast between her frail body and the intensity of her desperate gesture. Johnny felt a weight in his chest as if that brief interaction carried a message he couldn't yet decipher. The people around returned to their routines, but for him, the scene became a puzzle piece begging to be solved. As he walked slowly to his car, images of the young girl flooded his mind. Who was she? What had driven her to act that way? Unanswered questions followed him on his way, awakening a restlessness that wouldn't let go. He realized there was more to this than a chance encounter. It was as if destiny was calling him to something greater. The mystery left behind by that girl lingered like a specter, and Johnny knew he couldn't simply ignore it. There was a path to follow, a story to uncover, and he was determined to find the answers. What he didn't know yet was that this moment was just the beginning of a journey that would change not only her life, but also his own. The encounter with the young girl left Johnny Depp unsettled, a feeling that lingered even after he returned to the hotel. He felt that simply turning his back and moving on would be like ignoring an urgent call. That very afternoon, he decided to retrace his steps through the busy streets of Paris, guided by an almost instinctive intuition. The camera flashes and whispers of fans seemed insignificant compared to the mission now taking shape in his mind. Johnny wanted to find her, needed to know who she was and what had led her to him. After walking through several streets and carefully observing every corner, he finally spotted her. She was sitting on the ground in front of a modest shop, her hands outstretched in a silent plea. The scene was painfully contrasting, the opulence of the storefronts reflected in her vacant gaze, and her frail body seemed on the verge of collapse. Johnny approached her slowly, aware that any sudden movement could scare her away again. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching to her level. For a moment, the young girl hesitated, but the sincerity in his voice broke through her fear. "Sonia," she replied, her voice barely audible. From that brief dialogue, Johnny began piecing together fragments of a story he could never have imagined. An orphan, surviving on the streets, battling circumstances no one should have to face. Every word Sonia spoke seemed to carry the weight of years of suffering, but there was something even darker in her tone, a secret she was reluctant to share. Johnny, however, didn't push her. He knew trust wasn't earned by force. Instead, he offered help. At first, Sonia resisted, but his determined and empathetic gaze made her relent. She allowed him to step closer, perhaps for the first time, into her reality. As the two walked away from the crowd, the sense that this was more than a random encounter grew stronger and stronger. Johnny was stepping into a world he barely knew, but something inside him told him that this was exactly where he was meant to be. What he didn't yet realize was just how urgent her need for help truly was. As Johnny began to grasp the magnitude of Sonia's struggles, the fragments of her story painted a bleak picture. Sonia was not just a young orphan battling the hardships of the streets. She carried an even heavier burden. With a trembling voice and hands clutching her frail arms, she revealed something Johnny could never have anticipated. "I'm sick," she admitted, her expression a mixture of shame and desperation. Her fragile body was more than a consequence of hunger. It was the mark of a severe medical condition silently consuming her. As Sonia spoke, Johnny felt a knot form in his throat. It was a cruel, unjust reality that seemed too great for someone so young to bear. Her words grew slower, and her breathing became increasingly irregular. Suddenly, as if all her energy had been drained, Sonia began to sway. Johnny barely had time to react before she collapsed into his arms, the moment as abrupt as it was heartbreaking. The crowd around them froze in shock as Johnny moved with the urgency of someone who knew every second mattered. Without hesitation, Johnny carried her toward the nearest hospital, his concern etched into his face. With every step he felt the frailty of her body, as if he were holding something that could break at any moment. The journey, though brief, felt like an eternity. He kept silently reassuring himself that she would be okay, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling that the situation was more serious than he wanted to admit. Arriving at the hospital, Johnny wasted no time explaining what had happened. He demanded immediate attention for Sonia, his commanding presence cutting through any red tape. The doctor's expressions shifted as they assessed her condition, and within moments, Sonia was whisked away to the emergency room. Johnny remained behind, watching the doors close and feeling the helplessness of someone who wanted to do more, but knew that for now, her fate was in the hands of others. As he waited for updates, Johnny found himself reflecting on the strange turn his life had taken in recent days. He had entered that hotel as a celebrity seeking rest, and now he sat in a hospital, fighting to save the life of a young girl he barely knew. The silence in the corridor was heavy, but the resolve in his heart remained firm. He knew this was only the first of many battles to come. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor finally appeared in the corridor, his expression serious. Johnny immediately stood up, desperate for any news. The words that followed confirmed his fears. Sonia had stage 3 malignant melanoma, an aggressive condition requiring immediate intervention. The doctor explained that she needed urgent surgery and prolonged treatments to have a real chance of survival. Johnny listened intently, but his mind was already made up before the doctor even finished. He looked directly into the doctor's eyes and declared, "Do whatever it takes, I'll cover everything." The hospital sprang into action. Sonia was rushed to the operating room while Johnny handled the financial formalities without hesitation. He signed documents, ensuring every cost would be covered. In a world where so many lives are lost due to a lack of resources, he knew his privileged position could at least change Sonia's reality. The weight of this responsibility didn't intimidate him. If anything, it fueled his sense of purpose. As he waited for the surgery to conclude, Johnny paced the hospital corridor, unable to sit still. Time seemed to drag, and his anxiety painted every possible scenario in his mind. He kept replaying the look on Sonia's face before she collapsed, a mix of fear and resignation that had left a lasting impression. That image became a source of determination. He wasn't just helping a stranger. He was standing up against a system that often fails the most vulnerable. Hours later, the same doctor returned, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "The surgery was a success, but the road ahead will be long," he informed Johnny. A massive weight lifted off Johnny's shoulders, but he knew this wasn't the end. Sonia now had a fighting chance, but her recovery would depend on more than medicine. She would need emotional and material support, something he was fully prepared to offer. Visiting her in the ICU shortly after, he was struck by how fragile yet resilient she looked, even in her unconscious state. Johnny left the hospital that night with a new mission in mind. Saving Sonia's life was just the beginning. He wanted to ensure she had the opportunity to truly live. And as he reflected on what still needed to be done, a plan began to take shape in his mind. When Sonia finally regained consciousness, Johnny felt an immense wave of relief. However, during one of their conversations in the recovery ward, she revealed something that weighed even heavier on his heart. The orphanage where she lived, called Hope's Haven, was in dire straits. The place barely managed to feed the children, let alone provide proper medical care. Sonia spoke about friends who, like her, were battling illnesses without any assistance. Each word carried a crushing emotional weight, painting a grim picture of neglect that too many children face. Driven by a sense of responsibility that extended far beyond the immediate situation, Johnny decided to visit the orphanage himself. Upon arrival, he was met with a scene of bittersweet contrasts. The old building, with walls that once seemed full of life, now showed clear signs of decay. Children played in the yard with broken toys, while the dedicated staff did their best with almost no resources. It was a place filled with stories, shy smiles, and eyes silently pleading for help. Johnny wasted no time taking action. He gathered his team and devised a plan that went beyond one-time donations. His goal was to transform Hope's Haven into a sanctuary that could truly meet the needs of the children. The vision included everything from structural renovations to building a fully equipped clinic, ensuring that no orphan would ever have to endure the neglect Sonia had experienced. He understood he couldn't change the entire world, but he was determined to change the world for these children. Word of Johnny's involvement quickly spread through the local community, inspiring others to contribute. Donations poured in, volunteers came forward, and the orphanage, once forgotten, became a symbol of hope. It was as if the ripple effect of one good deed extended outward, touching lives Johnny might never meet. More than a physical transformation, he was helping rebuild dreams, showing these children that they mattered and deserved a brighter future. As Johnny watched the first changes take shape, he felt something shift within himself. It wasn't just the satisfaction of helping, it was the realization that he was being transformed too. In that moment, he understood that Sonia wasn't just a girl seeking salvation. She had become the catalyst for something far greater. During Sonia's recovery, Johnny realized that there was something even more powerful than any medication or surgery: the emotional strength to face the unknown. He knew that the hospital, with its cold, sterile corridors, was not the most welcoming environment for a young girl who had just stared death in the face. So, he decided to use one of his greatest talents, bringing joy through imagination. Inspired by his iconic role as Captain Jack Sparrow, Johnny showed up next to Sonia in full costume, instantly drawing a real smile from her for the first time in weeks. The transformation in Sonia's mood was almost immediate. Johnny wasn't just playing the pirate, he was making her forget, even if just for a moment, the pain and hardship she had been through. He told her stories of sea adventures, hidden treasures, and loyal crews, all infused with the quirky humor that made him famous. Sonia listened intently, her eyes lighting up like a child rediscovering magic. Each visit became a little escape to a world where problems didn't exist, and this connection began to strengthen their bond. As the children at the orphanage learned of Johnny's visits, they began sending letters and drawings for Sonia. Inspired by this, Johnny came up with the idea of making small videos as Jack Sparrow, dedicated to her and her friends at Hope's Haven. He spoke about courage, friendship, and the importance of never giving up, even in the fiercest storms. The videos quickly spread across social media, touching the hearts of thousands of people around the world, generating a movement of support for the orphanage and for children in similar circumstances. As Sonia slowly regained her strength, she and Johnny became an unlikely team. He encouraged her to speak more about her dreams and plans for the future, helping her to look beyond her illness. In return, she gave him a perspective he had never experienced before, a raw, honest view of how human resilience can thrive in the most adverse environments. It was a mutually transformative exchange that deeply changed both of them, turning that journey into something far more meaningful than either had anticipated. Johnny knew that the days spent in the hospital were only part of the story. Sonia wasn't just a patient, she had become a symbol of overcoming adversity and hope, something he wanted to share with the world. And as he accompanied her through this process, he realized they were both navigating toward a destiny that could inspire thousands of others. And so, the story of Johnny Depp and Sonia leaves us with a powerful lesson. The strength of a single gesture can go further than we imagine. Johnny didn't just change the fate of a young girl, he reignited hope in an entire orphanage, inspiring thousands of people around the world. It makes us reflect. How many times have we passed by situations where we could have helped but chose to ignore? Perhaps the courage to act is closer than we think. We just need to listen to that inner call that tells us to make a difference. Now we want to know, which part of this story touched you the most? Do you believe small actions can truly transform lives? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this. After all, with every click, you're helping to spread messages that inspire and transform.